we're going to start this lovely panel with our esteemed colleagues here who will introduce themselves momentarily. My name is Ori Eisen. I'm the founder and CEO of Trusona. Today I'm going to be keeping time, as I was asked by the Know people, and also moderate this panel. We had a call a few weeks ago about what the topic is and what we're going to say. And we realized very, very quickly on this call that this will be probably one of the more interesting panels you've ever listened to. We are not here to agree with each other. But more interesting, after we go around with our own opinions and ideas, we're going to open it up for you to ask some questions so we make it interactive. And as I promised, 3:45, we're going to clap and we'll go off stage. For those of you who are just getting in here, this panel is about the balance between convenience, security, and privacy. About 10 years ago, a triangle was published that said it's really difficult to balance all the requirements to make something secure, convenient, and private. I'll give you the one example that is not in the technical realm, which will be an airport, and then we'll open it up for our panelists to introduce themselves and share their views. The premise was if you had an airport and you wanted to be super, super, super secure, as in optimizing for security, some convenience have to be given away and some privacy or anonymity has to be given away. So you have to ask for passports when people get through this airport. If you'd said, I want to optimize this airport for convenience, meaning speed to get to the airplane and not go through any kind of magnetometers and things like that, then you might cave in a little bit on the security. And last but not least, if you said, I want to maintain privacy and anonymity, I don't want you to know who I am while I go through this airport, the point is also some security would be going down. So I'll ask our panelists to go from end back to here to Stina to introduce themselves, what they do, and their views about this triangle. And away we go.
Thanks very much. Steve Wilson from Constellation Research. I lead a body of work on digital safety and privacy.
Greg Kidd from globaliD. We work on making identity portable and self-sovereign.
Thomas Hardjono, MIT Connection Science. We're working towards a data-driven society and all the infrastructures that we'll need for the future data-driven society.
Stina Ehrensvard from Yubico, CEO and founder. Driving global authentication and encryption standards.
Awesome. Why don't we start at the end? What are your thoughts about the optimization and the big question of this session, can we have it all?
So can we have it all? It's the sort of thing that you say to your kids. You say, you say to your young kid, you can have it all. And it's an aspirational statement. The very next thing that we'll say at school is things like, be modest, negotiate, and we try and teach them how to make their way in the real world. So I think that the question is misframed. I think the idea that you could have security and privacy at the same time, you can answer yes optimistically and politically. This is a political question, and I think the politics are very nice. We should not accept that privacy and security get traded off. So I don't accept that for a second. So I guess if I'm cornered by a security zealot, I'll say yes, we can have security and privacy at the same time. But the more nuanced view is that privacy is a state. It's not a thing that can be traded off anyways. Privacy is like value. Privacy is a state where people who know things about me are restrained in what they do with that knowledge about me. And so when you look at it as an outcome, you can actually start to look at those trade-offs a little bit better. I accept, of course, there are trade-offs between security and anonymity, but anonymity and privacy are different things. There's a new term going around called privacy engineering, and I like the term because it speaks of compromise and it speaks of real-world tensions. So privacy engineering is like any engineering. It's like trading off cost and performance and security and usability. And if we look at privacy as an optimization problem, where we're trying to make use of value but restrain information, make sure that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, make sure that people know what's being done with their information, then that's a state of privacy, and we can have privacy and security at the same time.
All right, and Greg, to you, please add convenience to that triangle. Can we have it all?
So I don't know how many of you visited. They actually have the Declaration of Independence on display here in Washington. And it tackles a similar quandary, except it's not talking about privacy and security as conflicting values. It talks about liberty and equality. And many people have asked the same thing. How can you have a society that has both liberty and equality? Aren't those conflicting values? Well, my reading of constitutional history and my reading of this problem here is there's conflicting values, but there's also complementary values. And this country was constructed on the concept that you could have liberty and equality, and they're actually complementary values. I would argue, and I think Edward Snowden suggested it today, that privacy and security can be complementary as opposed to conflicting, and that convenience and economics could come with that as well. We can talk a little bit more about how, but I think this has been deliberately set up to solve the conundrum, just like we need to solve with the Declaration of Independence, is how do you make what are apparently conflicting values complementary? It can be done.
Thomas?
Okay, where do I start? So that is a very old paradigm, I think, this triangle thing. I tend to think of layers, and those three things sit at probably the bottom, if not the bottommost layer. So if you think up, for a data-driven society, personal data is the new asset class. That was the main headline of the 2011 World Economic Report, basically on big data. Right? And so the question in my mind becomes, where does data and value come in? So to use Ori's example, if I go to an airport, I'm walking through a door, I'm essentially doing a transaction. And what am I willing to trade for that? And it's true of anything you do online today, what are you letting go? And so I think the correct question there, the frame should be that add fourth and fifth axis, which is data and value. What is it that's being enabled by this, right? So anyway.
Stina?
Yes, we can have it all.
Tell us more.
But we need open standards to make it happen. A very practical example came to my email a few months ago. It was from a journalist who's with the email heading, "Thank you for saving my life." And he had set up a security key with his Gmail account, and he'd taken all the privacy security measure he needed to do to protect his online identity from a non-democratic government. His coworkers had not done the same, and they're no longer alive. So this technology is an open standard that we created together with Google. The security key has super good security, better than smart cards.
But you just said the life of this person was saved, meaning he was not exposed, so his privacy was super protected. That is not having it all.
Yes.
That is optimizing for something, no?
So this is now optimized for being secure yet anonymous. The challenge so going back to the standard, FIDO2F, it is now getting integrated in all computers, platform, browsers, and leading cloud services. Within a few years, you will see it everywhere. And that is the core for making anything happen at scale. It's designed to preserve privacy. So it has 2.5, secure yet anonymous.
Can we have it all is the question.
Yes. So, and then I've gathered all these people who worked on this standard and trying to figure out how do we not tie something that is secure yet anonymous with your real identity. What is the standard that is required? Is it something that's in the cloud? Is it a private data store that only the users will have access to? And our conclusion is that we will actually not store anything in the cloud. We'll store it on the authenticators themselves. So the users own and control their identities, if they're verified with a real identity or if they're anonymous, and then these authenticators will release the data to the service providers and the identity providers. I'm very excited about this development, and when it's ready, we will have it all.
Okay, let me try and take us all down a thought experiment and see where the world is today. If you were running a bank and your users said, I want to use Facebook login to log into the bank and move money. Let's go and ask the question. That will mean optimizing it for convenience, of course. Would you agree to it? Yes, no, and if not, why?
Today, no way.
Why? What's wrong?
What's wrong is the asymmetry that's involved with social media and privacy and utility. And it's a great thought experiment. It helps, I think, go to the point that there is a transaction going on in social media, and that transaction gets, again, really simplistically framed around security and privacy and utility. Of course, what's happening is that social media companies are monetizing information about us. They give us fantastic utility. I don't actually use Facebook myself, but I use other social media. I use Google. The utility of these things is fantastic. The question is there a transparent and reasonable and fair bargain for our personal information? We give up personal information for a return. If you think about privacy as being akin to value, so privacy again is an outcome, you can have a win-win outcome in privacy, and you can have a win-win outcome in value. I can buy stuff with money, I can give up money and I can get stuff back. I should in principle be able to give up some personal information and get something in return for that. And if the deal is transparent and negotiable, and I've got some ability to make that negotiation, then you can have a privacy outcome. I don't see any negotiability in any social media right now. It's a one-way street. I give up a lot of liberty, I give up a lot of freedom and privacy in that deal. So at this stage, the idea of using Facebook for banking, as attractive as it is, I would want to see a lot more balance and a lot more transparency in the bargain.
Okay, Greg?
So let's break that down. So I come from the Twitter world, and the Twitter world is where OAuth and OAuth 2 came from. And so the Facebook connection has two parts. One is a concept of how you actually do connect with someone else's credential into another site. That's interesting. It's a different issue when it's Facebook doing that. So the question would be, how could you do something that has OAuth security, but without relying on a central authority like Facebook? And is those two things separable? I think they are. And so the concept of using attestations that you've received from one set of actors or attestation agents, if it's controlled by you in a self-sovereign way, then it would be interesting to log in with a connect type capability, but not one that makes you reliant on Facebook or someone else who actually has your privately identifiable information. If all you were handing over were just attestations about your identity as opposed to the private information, then it would be like going through an airport and having a passport that had attestations about things that were levels of assurance about your identity, but without giving away what your identity was. Because what do countries actually want to prevent when people are coming in through this process? They want to prevent certain bad actors. Does that mean they have a list of people they don't want? Maybe. Or is it really that they want to prevent certain types of people with certain types of characteristics from coming in? You could achieve the latter without having to have people's actual identity revealed in that passport exercise or in a connect process that works like Facebook, but without Facebook.
Okay, Thomas, what do you think?
You're talking current bank or a future bank? Let me answer the future bank.
Right now, if you were the chief risk officer at the big bank and your marketing department says, hey, all of our users said, if you allow us to come in with Facebook, it'll be very convenient, we love it. Enable it for us.
So if I was a bank today, I'd say, sure, you can log on, but you'll only see the lowest quality data, probably nothing. So let me rephrase this. So a lot of banks today, everybody probably is aware of this, this whole thing about Bitcoin and decentralized computing, decentralized currencies. It's causing a lot of aches, and a number of financial institutions, banks, truly having a soul-searching period right now, and they're asking themselves, will they be in the business of banking in the next 10 years? And people not, anybody from a bank here? So question is, the future of banks, should a bank be a tech provider? Should a bank be an identity provider? And what does the word identity provider mean? I've been saying identity provider 2.0 because the current model based on OAuth, SAML is pretty restrained. SAML came from the days when people want to do web single sign-on. OAuth came from just the apps trying to do delegation of apps from one app to a resource. But going to the future, is it possible that maybe we don't need Facebook at all? Maybe Bank of something, I won't mention brands here, Bank of X says, you know what, I have the same technology and the same reach and the same data quality, probably better than Facebook. Actually, I will say banks have better data quality than Facebook. You can quote me that. Okay, so you know, maybe that is the direction, right? That in the future you will have this notion of decentralized identity providers. Those who hold data need to be identity providers 2.0. They need to be what I call data providers, you know, attribute providers, right? And that's, I think we're seeing this slowly, but you know, the question for me that I haven't seen, you know, answer is, what is the value there? Are the banks going to be getting new sources of revenue? Do we need new federation models, data federation versus identity federation models? At MIT, we're very interested in, you know, new data sharing paradigms. How do you monetize data by sharing? How do you incentivize individuals at home, you know, to want to share data? So the IoT era is here. If you buy the next washing machine, the next appliance, it's got a sensor, right? It's going to start collecting data. And those nice Wi-Fi boxes in your basement, you know, it's going to be replaced one day with these boxes that has capability to talk to these sensors. So everybody wants to collect data. Where's the data going to? Right? And so question I have is, well, you know, how do you incentivize individuals to actually want to participate in this new ecosystem versus what Steve is, you know, correctly saying before? I mean, you know, we're being ripped off right now, right? Particularly by the social networks.
Stina, what do you think?
So I think there are about 35 million websites that are today secure, that they have connected with Facebook login. And in general, I believe that these 35 million websites are more secure than a lot of others who hasn't, because Facebook have the power and understanding of internet security at scale. So if I was a CISO for a small bank with small resources, I would go the Facebook way.
And a big bank?
A big bank, I would probably want to control my data more, because...
But why is there a difference between being a small bank and a big bank with the risk?
I mean, I would say the financial resources and technical resources to actually build what is required in the back end to do this, the security at scale. Facebook have made support for the security key, so Facebook is quite good.
Not every Facebook user is using the security key.
What?
Not every Facebook user is using it.
No, but I would, if I was a bank, I would say, you can log into this bank if you have a security key, and Facebook is your identity provider. That would be my response.
Okay. I told you it will be interesting.
Go ahead.
Can I just add to that? It's been a couple of years since I've done this experiment, so I might be corrected, but a few years ago, I imagined that I was a website provider or a relying party, to use the jargon, and I went to Facebook's publicly available material to find the agreement that I assume happens between the relying party and Facebook as an identity provider. I couldn't find it. Now, 2 years ago, the understanding in the community was that Facebook didn't provide a relying party agreement. So if you were a website operator and you wanted to accept Facebook login, you just did it. It was like the Nike thing, right? Just do it. Now, I think when it comes to banking, now either that situation's changed, there is now a relying party agreement, but if you imagine a bank negotiating a relying party agreement, it's going to be really interesting. The reason why federation is difficult is that you cannot get normally an identity provider to give an open-ended assurance to a relying party. Banks have tried it over and over. There's actually some good news. Give us the code. Yeah, who wants drinks?
Hold on, he's a consultant,
If you,
and he brings drinks to the stage? What's going on? You're hired, Dave.
This is the best service of any conference I've ever been at. What a good attestation. The good news for the humble user in all of this is if there was a funny new love triangle between banks, social media, and individuals, you can bet that while the individual has got not a chance in hell of negotiating the deal for personal information with Facebook, you can bet that the banks do. And you can imagine a world where the banks negotiate a much better bargain because they're not going to have their data ripped off by Facebook, not for free. So you can imagine the negotiating power of a bank with a social media to wind up with a triangle that is actually much more equitable. And I think that would be innovative.
More equitable for who?
Right.
Let's take this one level deeper, just so we can make it real.
Let's unpack this, okay.
So now I'm going to ask you the question, and I want you to be serious. If you had the top job, 1 second, Dave is trying to thank you for the Coke you brought in the middle of a panel. That's a first. Never seen Coke being brought to stage before. Let's ask the question. If you were the head risk person it doesn't have to be a bank. It could be a government agency. It could be in a university. It could be your own company. And now the question is, would you allow a login from another company that is in social media to access very sensitive things? Now, Thomas already said, well, if I let you in, I'll show you that I know your name and maybe the balance. I would argue even the balance should not be shown to somebody who's not you. So that is that first step. If you had 100 logins in a day and everything was fine, I'm sure there's no problem, right? But the minute $1 million disappears and you go to the CEO and he's asking you, what were you thinking? Let's simulate that moment and then dive deeper, shall we? Go.
So first off, let's just be clear that there's already passive integrations, right? The company Yodlee has allowed sites all around to use the bank's own login credentials, tokenize them, and become a way of getting in. So Facebook and others can already backdoor all of this. Now, that's technically already possible, and it's already happening en masse. That's how Mint works. And so, the real question is, what are the banks going to do about it? Now, in Europe, if you deny people access to their own data, that's a violation of PSD2. In the US, you can write terms of use that can say, hey, if you use the site and you've got a red tie, that's a hacking violation because you're not authorized to. So in the US, this game is being played not at technological level, because technologically it's already happening. It's being played at a power politics level. That's why I'm saying when we're asking the bank, the social network, who's really at risk and who's benefiting here, the person not being represented in the room is the end user, the consumer. So that's just a battle between two big heavyweights, the banks and the social networks. But I would argue that regardless of who gets the power, the person that's being left out in the lurch in this is the end user. And so we're really talking about a false dichotomy here, this power play between these two, because the guy that really matters, or the gal, isn't even in this question.
Right, I'll just add, and I love the fact that you added Yodlee. Yodlee has enabled it, but my question was, if you were the head person at the bank, would you choose that method, and would you risk your career on it? The answer is yes or no.
I wouldn't be doing it with Facebook and OAuth. That's still a world that's based on usernames and passwords. I do come from the blockchain world. I do come from public-private key cryptography. I do believe this can be made self-sovereign. So I would believe that making that trade-off is a trade-off that's 10 years in the past. So that's not the trade-off I would make.
Very good. So where I'm leading this, at least in this thought exercise, there's another one after, is some logins are made for convenience. And I hope you agree that I can start today. Any email I want with any identity I want. I can then go to social media and become whoever I want with that account. And it's synthetic, completely synthetic. So a bank should not trust that because there's nothing behind it that asserts this is real.
Excuse me, but so what the banks are trusting is a KYC sign-up process that is the person's name, date of birth, address, and social security number, 500 million of which were hacked by Yahoo. The concept that the bank's data for KYC is good, well, I can't agree with that. The reason the NSA goes after phone metadata as opposed to like scouring bank records is phone metadata is a lot better. Biometrics are a lot better. The data that the banks are working off of not 10 years out of date, not 20 years out of date, 30 years out of date, and already breached, not just for little banks using Fiserv, but for big banks like Chase.
This is apples and oranges. The KYC is not the only thing that the banks go on. If the banks establish a relationship for one piece of data at one point in time, then you'd be right. But the KYC is only a regulatory game that the banks have to play because they're told to. The banks are no fools in this area. The banks do risk management better than anybody. The banks know exactly who they're dealing with to sufficient accuracy for the purposes of their business.
Well, I would have to disagree. I would say, like for the wire transfers, even at the New York Fed, we got burned by, sorry, I come from the Fed, so I can criticize, but we got burned by a simple fax scheme from, was it Bangladesh or Pakistan? People sending in instructions. Yeah, they know who the central bank is of Bangladesh or Pakistan, but people can send in transactions and spoof, and they stole over $70 million before people caught on. So I don't think the banks are on the top of their game in this case, either for stopping identity theft peoples or interdicting major terrorist financing or money laundering. Panama Papers, not accepted.
Yeah. So, Thomas, let's go back to if you were the head risk at a large bank, would you agree to it? If yes, why? And if no, why?
So since I have a fiduciary obligation to the bank, I will give them the proper advice, and I would say no.
Why?
Because the risk is too high.
But hold on, we can have it all, I heard.
I never said that.
Privacy.
She said it.
Oh, hold on. We'll get to Stina in a minute. Why? Why wouldn't you? What's the core issue? Why can't you trust it?
So the core issue is trust and defining trust. And we can go on to that. We need to qualify the word trust because it's being bandied around too loosely. I talk about technical trust and social trust and legal trust. Technical trust is the technology underneath, all the protocols, the crypto, the hardware, the HSMs, great. It works beautifully, fine. There's a thing called social trust, which is this, maybe it's part of a contract. So you walk into a bank not just to establish legal trust, but also social trust, maybe. And that's why banks are still putting offices, real-world offices, in certain locations because there's this need of a social trust. And then there's a legal trust. So the fine print, that all the warranties, liabilities, all that stuff, right? And so I came from the PKI world. And back when you want to buy a certificate, an X500 certificate, there's a thing called the Certificate Practices Statement. Now, the one for VeriSign that I helped write as a technical person is 104 pages. Now, if you go now and Google the Symantec version, it's no better. It's still 85 or 86 pages, just a shorter version. And that is essentially a contract, right? The end user doesn't read it. If you buy a corporate level certificate, the lawyers will read it, and it's listed there. VeriSign's liable for $1 million per lost certificate, or if it's a low class, class 3, class 2 certificate, it's like $10,000. So it depends on, how much you're willing to pay. And so I'll say to my boss, if you force me to do this with Facebook, then you have to give me a ranking list of what you're willing to fork out, just in case there's an issue. We have to make this clear to the user that if transaction X causes loss Y, the bank is going to cover Z. Okay,
Stina, what do you think?
I would not do it today, but shortly, because
2.5 again?
Solutions are on its way. Fantastic solutions, by the way.
Tell us more.
So I would say there's a false premise here. Why do you think it's the bank's choice to decide and not the user's choice?
I'll get to that in my last thought experiment. And I'm using banks on purpose because it's the easiest thing to understand. There's value. I didn't use the OPM as an example. I should have. I didn't use the F-35 secret plans. I should have, right? One would argue they have a slightly more value. I should have used a nuclear power plant login. Why can't the people at the nuclear power plant log in with their Facebook? Why?
Because they're still using Windows XP. Oops. Did I say that? I'm sorry.
They're busy. It's too soon. It's too soon, and they're busy right now recovering. But Stina, why wouldn't you use Facebook right now to protect a big bank?
As I said, a security key with social login is better security than what most small banks out have. So I think it's okay, but if you really want to ensure that, to step up at a higher level of security, there are pieces that are not there yet, but they're coming.
Okay. So last thought experiment, and then we're going to open it up to the crowd. Everyone but Dave can raise their hand and ask a question. All right. Let's flip it on its head. So that was the discussion with the marketing people who tell you, you must use Facebook, and some of you agree, some of you don't. What would happen if the CEO of the bank would come back to you, and by the way, it could be a nuclear power plant and other things, and say, you know what, I want you to create the system that has it all. I want convenience, I want privacy, I want security, and I want you to be insured at the end. Which means, you just said, if we use Facebook, the immediate knee-jerk was, well, how much money are we willing to lose for this convenience, right? What if you were told not to lose anything? What would you do then? Let's start with you, Steve.
I'm going to jump straight into solution mode and say that I think you'd wind up with some sort of cryptographically secure wallet of a number of different attributes. The attributes are going to be presented in some sort of meaningful way. That we have plenty of models for this already. As human beings, we're very used to going around and showing things. We don't think about levels of assurance. We don't think about trust. We don't think about all of those things that the Identirati have basically injected into this to make it complicated. We have wallets full of things that actually speak of memberships and relationships and entitlements. I think what we need is the exact cryptographic analog of these things, cryptographically secure, probably through public key infrastructure of some sort. And we would carry these things as graphically represented probably in wallets. We've got really close to this so many times with things like InfoCard and technologies that the FIDO Alliance are working on, UAF and U2F that Stina's talked about. We're very close to these things. What we're missing is some simplifying assumptions around what are the legal arrangements behind these things. And we have tried to make it too complicated. We've tried to over-federate. We've tried to say that we could have a certificate that's recognised by more than one relying party. It's too hard. And look, and with respect, we're also at the moment on the cusp of making it too complicated with the idea of self-sovereign. Now, self-sovereign is a lovely idea, and there's some really good objectives that we're striving for. But the idea that I'm going to have an identity that I own and that I then impress upon everybody around me is utopian. It would generate such incredible complexity in terms of upsetting the relationships that we've already got. I don't for a moment defend the asymmetry that we've got with social media. I mean, the social media robber barons are absolutely abhorrent. I think the banks are better, but they're not much better. So look, I feel for the user, and I'm out there, at the barricades as well, campaigning for a better set of digital rights for users, but we're not going to get better digital rights by changing the way that relationships work in businesses and so on. So what I'd like to do is to more or less accept the form of the relationships that we have now and renegotiate those relationships so we do better with Facebook and Google and the banks. But the form of the relationships, which are, I have a contract with a bank, I have a contract with my employer, those forms I think we want to preserve. I think we want to lock them away into some sort of digital token, a number of these things, and allow people to federate their attributes. I don't think we're ever going to have one bank saying, hey, you've got a bank account with that bank, sure, open one here. But if one bank will say, here's Steve Wilson's date of birth, credit history, social security number, and those other attributes, and we can federate attributes, and we'll wind up with the digital equivalent of the leather wallet.
Greg, what would you do?
So I agree with a lot about the cryptographic signing.
That's the easy part.
Well,
How would you know who's who?
I would observe, though, in defense of still looking at something that's self-sovereign, is that the world of banks and even social media isn't the model you'd be looking at if you wanted to make this really simple. The things that have really grown in the last couple of years that have been instrumental have been simpler than social networks. They've been things like WhatsApp, Telegram, messaging. The movement of money and the movement of other permissions, whether it's permission to send medical records or share a location or fire missiles, is a lot more like, I believe, the way those messaging apps currently allow you to share pictures, music, through your contact list. Now you might say that contact list sounds really simple, but if you think of your contact list combined with the cryptographic signing that you're doing, so instead of sharing my permission for you to see a picture, sharing sending money or medical records or permissions to open my car door, what you're really doing is you're using your address book in a way that's very old-fashioned. You're sharing powers of attorney. So this is a concept called multisig. So instead of relying on big top-down institutions to co-sign for our permissions, so we can make this a user-defined risk process for the amount of privacy and security, you could do it very simply by following the models of WhatsApp and Telegram for sharing not pictures, but sharing permissions for moving money. So if I'm only moving $100, I don't need any co-signatures. But if it's 100,000 or 1 million, I might need one of the other people I've designated in my address book to co-sign, or two. It's an old-fashioned concept, powers of attorney combined with cryptographic signing and overlaid on something that I think is the future killer app, which is just plain old messaging, which is why, like, WeChat in China is knocking it out of the park in terms of more functionality that you can do. Now, I don't like that it's top-down, but the mechanics of that on a self-sovereign basis, like something for Telegram, which does not have a top-down model, that I believe is a model that could work going forward and scale.
All right, Thomas and Stina, we'll get your take, and
Okay.
then we'll ask the audience if they have questions for this panel.
So if my CEO said that to me, I will answer with two things. The first thing is, of course, how much money do you have? Like, okay. And number two, which is back, it would be his or her job, and that is, how many other banks can you round up?
Okay. Stina, what would you do?
I agree with public key, not public key infrastructure, but simplified, like U2F. And
Hold on. What time is it on your watch? You
I don't have a watch.
I'm trying to ask a question where U2F is not the answer to.
What?
Just joking. Tell us, what would you do? U2F, you're saying, is the way to go. What else?
So the other part is really getting the ID verification tied to this, and tied is to OpenID Connect. That's the three pieces that are needed for scale. And ID verification will come in all kinds of forms. It will come issued from a government. It will come from your social network, who will prove who you are. It will come from yourself. I am this persona. And in order to put it all together, it requires open standards. So I am back to saying that these three pieces, and U2F and OpenID Connect is already merging. And they are already, I would say we're 95% there. So just give me a couple of years and I will have it. I am so excited.
We can tell. I think we can all tell. All right.
Anyway.
Let's open it up to the audience. Any questions anyone has for members of this panel? Okay, Dave, you can now ask any question you want. All right, any last comments? I know we have to clear the stage at 3:45. Thomas.
Just real quick. So Greg mentioned that contact list. That's the easiest point of attack, and we see it in BEC crime all the time. And it's used on software, ransomware, everything. It's the most insecure feature on your phone than anything else. But so to build what you're building, I think somebody's already built it. If you look at Dappre, DAPPRE.com in the Netherlands, and so it's a one-to-one, you establish your own contact list, and people aren't going to be able to, when they build apps and ask to look through the contact list, they're not going to look at your curated contact list. It's blockchain, it's encrypted. So I suggest you look to that.
So that would just be one piece. That's who you would like to trust. The other piece that would go with that is the component of having your contact list attached with your name, just like you have a Twitter or a Skype name. You could have one name or many names. No two people could have the same name. But the concept is that you would collect cryptographic signatures from whoever, many of the identity providers at this conference. And so what would be looked at is not just that one power of attorney, but all the attestations you've collected in a risk context manner. And so the party that's going to move the money for you would make a risk-based decision as to whether to move it or not. So I don't mean to make it sound like the contact list is the only place that you would rely on. It would just be one place to pick who you're going to pick as your powers of attorney.
All right. Any other questions from the crowd? All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. There's one more question. We have 3 more minutes.
Do you think there are any use cases where non-technological identity verification solutions are more appropriate? In other words, person-to-person attestation. And the second point of that is if you think that there are cases where non-technological solutions, personal attestation, still remain most appropriate, do you think that that will ever change?
I'll start just by saying many things in your life, like meeting family, friends, or your local store, do not use documents. They just recognize you and believe that it's you. And you can ask your store to, give you credit based on that. Happens all over the world all the time without any technology at all. But I'll ask the rest of the panelists if they have any other answers.
Well, I think Tony Soprano would agree with you. And so personal is always the best. And so, at the end of the day, how are the biggest decisions in life made? Well, Joey said he was okay, so, it must be okay, right? So the only thing to do to make that scalable is you can have person-to-person decisions, but if you get that recommendation from Joey, you have to put it somewhere that everyone can see it. And that's the great thing about blockchain or public ledger technology. I don't mean to be a public ledger blockchain fanboy, but the fact that once you get that person-to-person recommendation, you need Joey to sign it in a place that you can show it to everybody else. So it's a combination of something that's very low-tech and something that didn't exist 10 years ago. And that's kind of the exciting thing about this time in this space.
Any other comments? And then we're going to wrap.
So that's just analog for the win, I reckon. Analog turntables, paper books, face-to-face conversation, coffee. Analog for the win.
Thomas? Yeah, you remind me a sign at some bar that says, we don't have Wi-Fi, just do what you did 20 years ago. Talk to each other, have coffee, relax. All right, thank you so much for OE for having us here. Thank you, Stina, Thomas, Greg, and Steve. Thank you so much.